The man who died during this incident is 49-year-old Wayne Brunette of Burlington. Mr. Brunette and his family are longtime Burlington residents. Police have been working closely with the family during this investigation, which continues on 2 tracks, including a full investigation by the Vermont State Police, who you'll hear from in a moment, and an internal investigation by the Burlington Police Department. Mr. Brunette does have prior contacts with the Burlington Police dating back many years, but no recent contacts. The officers involved were identifying today as well. Corporal Brent Navari, a 10-year veteran of the department, and Corporal Ethan Thibault, a 12-year veteran. Corporal Thibault was the officer who fired at Mr. Brunette. Both officers, as we indicated yesterday, were uninjured and both remain on administrative leave, as is normal practice in these cases. The Brunette family continues to ask for us to relay their request for privacy and understanding during this difficult time. Once again, we ask that the community keep all those involved in this tragedy and their families in our collective thoughts and prayers. More information will be released both by our department and the state police as it becomes available. For details regarding the ongoing investigation, we'll ask Major Glenn Hall of the state police to brief you.
Morning. My name is Glenn Hall. I'm a major with the State Police Criminal Division Commander. I'm here with Captain J.P. Sinclair, who's the Chief Criminal Investigator for the Vermont State Police, and Lieutenant Bob Cushing, who is the B Troop BCI Commander. Lieutenant Cushing is overseeing this investigation. I'm just going to ask that you keep in mind that we're less than 24 hours into this investigation. However, we are going to, we're able to provide the following details today for you. So I'm going to read from a prepared statement here, and Stephanie DeSaro has a press release that she's prepared that she will hand out when we finish up here. On November 6th at approximately 4:42 p.m., the Vermont State Police were requested by the Burlington Police Department to conduct an investigation into an officer-involved shooting that occurred at 85 Randy Lane in Burlington involving a Burlington police officer. In accordance with Vermont State Police protocol, detectives from the Bureau of Criminal Investigations from B Troop were called in to investigate the incident. The Vermont State Police Crime Scene Search Team was also dispatched to process the scene. Preliminary investigation revealed that the Burlington Police Department received a call at 4:19 p.m. from Ruthine Dolly Brunette regarding her son who lives in an upstairs apartment. Mrs. Brunette described her son as acting irrational and destroying property. Burlington police officers, Corporal Ethan Thibault and Officer Brent Navari were immediately dispatched to 85 Randy Lane and arrived within approximately 5 minutes. Initial investigation indicates that upon arrival, officers made contact with a male subject later identified as Wayne Brunette, age 49, outside of the residence. Investigative details indicate that Mr. Brunette was brandishing a long-handled, pointed spade shovel and advanced toward the officers in a threatening manner. Officers are described by multiple witnesses as issuing multiple verbal commands directing Mr. Brunette to drop the shovel. However, Mr. Brunette failed to comply with those verbal commands. Burlington Police Officer Thibault fired shots from his duty weapon, a .40 caliber Glock, striking Mr. Brunette. At approximately 4:29 p.m., officers on scene reported shots fired, suspect down, and requested rescue. Rescue personnel responded and transported Mr. Brunette to Fletcher Allen Emergency, where he was pronounced deceased. Mr. Brunette was transported to the office of the Vermont Chief Medical Examiner's Office for autopsy to determine the cause and manner of death. An autopsy has been scheduled for today. Once the criminal investigation is complete, the case will be reviewed independently by the Chittenden County State's Attorney as well as the Attorney General's Office, as is customary in any officer-involved shooting. No other details at this time. This is an active investigation. We are still very much involved in the investigation itself. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So we would ask that anyone that has information about this incident or that hasn't come forward to contact the Vermont State Police, Lieutenant Cushing, who's out of the St. Johnsbury State Police Barracks, and the number is listed in the press release that will go out. Anyone have questions?
Just to clarify, he's dead when he gets to the hospital. Is he like dead on arrival, or was there some time frame, roughly?
I believe he was pronounced, Mike, at approximately shortly after 5 p.m.
What was the distance between the officers and the suspect when the officers fired?
That is all part of the investigation. The investigation will reveal those facts that, we're certainly not prepared at this point. As I said, we have a lot of work to do with the investigation itself, so that is, part of the investigation is learning those details.
And talk to me about, did he feel that his life was in danger? Did he lunge at him? Or tell me a little bit more about their encounters. There was no physical contact, though, I understand.
Again, those are, we are early on in the investigation, and until we get all those facts together and can make a determination, we're just not there yet.
Was a taser initially used?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Let me just confirm. The officers were uninjured, so that gives the inference that there was no contact made.
Correct.
How many shots were fired?
Again, that's part of the investigation. The autopsy will give us more information about that, and it's being conducted today. So until we get the final report of autopsy, those are all things that, as the investigation unfolds, we'll learn those answers to that question.
The autopsy won't necessarily say how many shots were fired. It will say how many times he got hit.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, a good chief last night said the preliminary was 2 shots. Is there any reason to disbelieve the chief today?
Well, again, those are, I can't speak for the information that the chief had at the time, but
I can say that that may or may not be accurate. As I indicated last night, the very preliminary information I had was 2. That may not be accurate. So still waiting, as Major said, for the investigation to fully flush out those details.
Major Hall, would you consider a shovel a deadly weapon?
it certainly could be.
How is it being wielded?
Again, the investigation will reveal those facts. I certainly can't comment on, and speculate. I can't answer hypotheticals. There were witnesses that provided information, and again, the investigation as it unfolds, we will, present all those facts together, and there'll be a review once that's complete.
Have the officers been interviewed yet? But have the Vermont State Police interviewed the Burlington officers?
No, we have an initial count from those officers as to what happened, but we will conduct a more detailed interview with those officers in the near future.
When you say you have an initial account, you didn't talk to them directly, basically?
Vermont State Police detectives have not talked to them directly at this point.
Talk to me a little bit about protocol. I understand every situation is different, and I respect that, but what are officers taught? To shoot in the leg or taser first, or what's, general?
I may be better suited because that
Sure.
relates to our policy. As I indicated last night, every event unfolds differently, and we don't draw direct lines between, if this happens, do this. There's a continuum of response to resistance, as I described last night, and different events unfold in different ways, so the nature of the response unfolds the same way, which is a long way of saying it depends on what you're faced with, the speed at which you're faced with it, and what the options are at the time. I think there was a second part of your question in terms of the sort of folklore of shoot for the leg or shoot the gun out of someone's
Taser
hand.
first,
That is not the reality of law enforcement, either in Burlington, in Vermont, or anywhere else in the nation. Law enforcement officers nationwide are taught in the event that you have to use a firearm, you're shooting for the center of visible mass. So if the visible mass is a leg, you may be shooting for that, but if the visible mass is an entire person, you're shooting for the middle of it, because under stressful circumstances, you may or may not be accurate. So
We've reported that he's got, Mr. Brunette has been arrested for destructive use of a device, aggravated assault on police, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, attempted simple assault. But it doesn't look like he's been in contact with you guys much lately. Is he?
as I indicated, we have a history of contacts, which I guess I'd prefer not to describe because it goes more to the criminal investigation, so I'll defer that to Major Hall. But Burlington Police have not had recent contact with him in the last few years.
Can you define recent years? I mean,
I'd have to go through a fairly sizable stack of paperwork, so I don't want to give you a specific year, but it's been several years since we've had contact.
June '03, there might have been something about assault on a police officer. Was that with Burlington?
It may be, that may be the last contact. There may be one in the intervening period, but in our current records management system, let me say this, our current records management system started in October of 2011. There are no records of contact with him in that system.
Do you have cruiser cam video of this happening?
We do not. Burlington does not have in-car cameras.
What about body cameras?
We do have body cameras. The officers involved in this particular event do not have body cameras.
How do you determine who gets body cameras and who doesn't? That's not across the board?
Right now, they're in an extended testing phase, and we are actually working on what the next phase of camera deployment may look like. So we have a limited number. They're assigned to particular officers who are doing that testing and rollout. So whether it's something of this nature or a vast number of other very complicated events, video obviously has an important role. And the question is, how are we going to deploy it on a larger scale?
I suppose
our records show that Officer Thibault has been honored several times by the department for his work. I'm just wondering, do you have any sort of record exactly on how many, and also with the second officer?
I know they've both received service awards for various things. I think Corporal Thibault's got one for military service, and they each have things in their files that relate to positive feedback from the community, but the details I haven't fully researched.
It sounds like from the state police report that the mother of this man was concerned about his mental health at this point when this happened. How do you train officers to handle issues like that? And also, are there mental health advisors on call?
It's a multi-phase question. We train consistently on mental health response, and we respond to an enormous number of mental health calls over the last, and I'm not specifically characterizing this as that. Again, the investigation still has to determine what the underlying issue was, but to answer this question, the call volume in terms of mental health calls has increased 375% in the last 5 years. So it's one of the core things that our folks are responding to. They're training constantly. They train in conjunction with the Howard Center clinicians. We have a couple of folks that do exclusively mental health work here, including a community interventionist who is actually a Howard Center employee based out of the police department that originally was funded with a grant that we received. So mental health is woven into everything that we do on a day-to-day basis.
How are the officers doing mentally?
I spoke with them today. They're holding up okay. As I indicated last night, it's a devastating event. Want to reiterate again, not as devastating as it is to the family involved, but this is not the kind of thing that they expect to happen here in Burlington when they come to work. And although prepared for it, it's just not the outcomes we're looking for.
It is an extraordinary event. You said last night that this hasn't happened in something like 16 years.
1997 was the last time we fired a weapon at a person.
What does that say about the department and its response to this kind of thing, that it is unusual?
Well, I think in general, we're lucky in a number of regards. We have very skilled staff. They respond to a large number of things every year, so the volume, well, many would probably tell you the volume is a downside to the job. The volume is also an upside in that they have a tremendous amount of experience dealing with vast and varied circumstance. And we're able to put a number of people on a scene very, very quickly. In this instance, I don't know how many officers we had there, but they were all there within 6 or 7 minutes, which is a benefit to being in an urban environment. And with that, if we know what we're responding to, we can deploy a large number of resources and a varied number of resources. It's the unusual events that transpire in a way where they're not predictable that are the more difficult ones to respond to. So.
And a question for both you and the Major. How confident are you both that this was an appropriate use of force?
At this stage, from the department's perspective, everything that we know so far indicates this was appropriate. But again, the investigation's still ongoing, so we are open to any possibility and we'll go where the evidence takes us. But in the absence of an indication otherwise, that's where the current thought process is for the department.
And Major, you feel the
Glenn,
same way?
can you answer that?
Well, again, I'm
realizing it's preliminary.
Yeah, I can't speculate. Our job is to investigate this incident, gather the facts, gather the information, and compile it and make determinations in conjunction with the state's attorney's office. So that's what we will do. We're going to continue the investigation, so that's really all I can say at this point.
This statement here for the state police is saying he's acting irrationally. Are you comfortable saying this is a man with some sort of mental health problem?
Again, I'm not comfortable saying that at this point. That's part of what the investigation entails. It's really digging into all this information and the history, and those are all things that we will look at. Investigators will pour through, past involvements, police involvements, and that type of stuff. So.
We've talked about the use of force continuum and the decisions officers have to make. And is that something you guys are also looking at, whether there were other things that they could have done?
Yeah, well, our role in this is the criminal investigation. Obviously, I can't speak to Burlington's policies, and that's why there's an internal investigation that they'll conduct. So certainly, our role is limited to this investigation, but certainly those are factors that are looked at overall.
Can you talk a little bit, or make a comparison yet, on the shooting here versus the shooting in Winooski? And then shortly thereafter, there was a statement, I guess, by the state attorney that officers now have a duty to retreat in some cases. I mean, how does that play into this?
I'm certainly not going to compare this to another case, Mike. Again, you're throwing out hypotheticals, and again, we are early on in this investigation. We're going to continue to investigate, and until the investigation is complete, I really can't, speculate.
Do you
Are there
have
civilian eyewitnesses?
Yes.
Do you have the ages of the officers involved, and also is there any evidence so far that drugs were involved?
Again, that's part of the investigation, but we're not at that point yet to make that determination. As far as the drugs, the ages, I don't know.
The officers, you say they'll be interviewed in the near future. Do you expect that to happen today? How does that work?
Yeah, we will. I suspect that when I say near future, in the next several days, could possibly be today.
Are there witnesses to this who are not Mr. Brunette's relatives?
Yes.
You heard there were like 7 witnesses altogether. Is that roughly how many people were? And we're realizing people see different things at different times.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, Mike, to the actual witnesses.
For you personally, just kind of a worst case scenario for law enforcement, emotionally, just something we never.
Well, I think as the chief said, this is obviously a tragic event for all involved. I think I'll leave it at that, but it's certainly not something that happens often, and it's one of those things that it's tragic for everyone involved.
Can you address the group, the B Troop detectives, which have a great leader out there? Obviously, did the Winooski case, but they're doing this case. I mean, was there some reason to use these guys again, or why not go to a
No, our-
D troop or whatever?
Our normal protocol, Mike, as you know, is to bring in detectives from outside the area, detectives that aren't familiar with the officers involved for obvious reasons. So, but there's no rhyme or reason really. Depending on who is available at the time, those decisions are made by Captain Sinclair as to assign. There are 3 other troops that we utilize. Four troops altogether. So, but.
It wasn't because they had experience in the last one, or?
No.
It was just happened to be who you dialed first?
Actually, my C and D troop lieutenants are out of state.
Was Mr. Brunette employed?
I don't know the answer to that.
Chief, do you?
I don't believe so.
At the time of the shooting, there were 2 officers on the scene, I believe, and after that, quite a few more showed up. Do you know, kind of at its height, roughly how many officers were at the scene?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm looking for someone who might have. Lieutenant, any clue? How many officers are at the scene? Do you have any idea?
Just a dozen uniform, and another 8 detectives.
So 15 to 20 Burlington officers.
And you said it
But I mean,
unfolded.
I guess I'm interested in between when they first were dispatched and when the shots were fired.
2.
There were just 2 there, and then everybody else
Um,
came after shots fired.
It was asked last night the time frame between arrival and when the call for the ambulance occurred, and that was so I researched that for you. It's roughly 2 minutes from the time of arrival to the time the ambulance was summoned.
So in 2 minutes, they showed up on the scene and he was shot.
Correct.
How do you respond to the public who may to say the guy had a shovel?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to respond to that. What do you think about that?
I think
I'm not
that's
sure.
one of my questions too. There is a bit of an outcry, certainly within the community, of was this too much? Did your officers go too far?
Oh,
And that's something that
okay.
they're, all over social media, that has been brought up.
Well, let me speak to training. When we train officers in that continuum of response to resistance or use of force, a baseball bat, a shovel, a large stick, a large branch, all of those things are potentially deadly weapons. We see them used as deadly weapons in assaults that occur on members of the community and on officers in other circumstances. So, the idea that a shovel is not potentially an imminent threat is just not one in the realm of law enforcement training, whether it's here or anywhere else in the nation. I think the law enforcement standard is very clear, and I think the court standards that evaluate those cases also are fairly clear that something like that can clearly be a deadly weapon.
With a weapon like that that doesn't have a sort of ranged option where he has to be swinging it for it to be deadly, is there any sort of standard for the distance? If he's all the way across the street swinging a shovel, is that different in law enforcement investigations' eyes than if he's right in your face?
It can be. Again, it's largely circumstance dependent. That was one of the questions last night, and I described that there's not a hard and fast rule, but within the training context of again, law enforcement and in terms of a national standard, we talk about a distance between 21 and 30 feet with an object, whether that's a bladed object, small or large, or any other object being a potentially imminent threat, because people can close that distance in less than a reactionary